because ignoring people is a trick or a game. It is because true power has never been about controlling others. It has always been about controlling yourself. Most people spend their lives believing that being noticed is the same as being respected. They think if they explain themselves enough, prove their worth enough, or remain available enough, people will eventually appreciate them. Yet reality often works in the opposite direction. Human beings naturally become accustomed to whatever is constantly available. Unlimited attention slowly loses its value because it becomes expected rather than earned. This is why many people who give the most are often appreciated the least. They mistake constant availability for genuine connection, while others quietly begin taking their presence for granted. Robert Greene repeatedly reminds us that influence begins with self-mastery. Before you can command respect from anyone else, you must first learn to command your own attention. Your attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess because it determines where your energy, emotions, and time will be invested. Every time you allow criticism, rejection, unnecessary drama, or the opinions of people who do not value you to dominate your thoughts, you give those people influence they never deserved. The greatest shift in personal power begins the moment you stop asking, "How do I get their attention?" and start asking, "Do they deserve mine?" Think about someone who constantly checks their phone after sending a message. Every minute without a reply creates anxiety. They replay conversations in their mind, wondering what went wrong. A delayed response affects their mood, their confidence, and even their self-worth. On the surface, it seems like a simple habit. Psychologically, it reveals something much deeper. Their emotional state has become dependent on another person's actions. They are no longer directing their own attention. It is being directed for them. This is how power quietly slips away. Long before someone controls your decisions, they first learn to control your focus. Now picture someone whose life revolves around meaningful goals instead of constant validation. They communicate honestly, but they do not chase people who repeatedly ignore them. They value relationships, but they refuse to sacrifice their self-respect just to remain in someone's life. If someone chooses to appreciate them, they welcome it. If someone repeatedly disrespects them, they calmly step back without anger or revenge. Their silence is not designed to punish anyone. It is simply a reflection of priorities. Their attention belongs to their purpose before it belongs to anyone else. This is why ignoring people becomes powerful. It teaches you to stop rewarding behavior that steals your peace. Every unnecessary argument you avoid, every manipulative conversation you refuse to continue, and every person you stop chasing allows you to reclaim a piece of your own energy. Instead of living reactively, you begin living intentionally. Instead of allowing every opinion to shape your emotions, you decide what deserves space in your mind. That quiet decision changes how you carry yourself, and people naturally notice the difference. There is another reason this shift creates influence. Human beings are drawn to those who appear emotionally secure. Someone who constantly seeks approval communicates uncertainty, even without saying a word. But someone who remains focused on their own path, regardless of who is watching, creates curiosity. People begin asking themselves why this person seems so unaffected. They sense confidence because confidence is not loudly announced. It is quietly demonstrated through behavior. The person who does not chase attention often receives it naturally because they are no longer dependent on it. However, this principle only works when it comes from genuine self-respect. If you ignore people only to make them chase you, you are still emotionally attached to their reaction. Your attention remains trapped by the very people you claim to be ignoring. That is not power. Real power is reaching a point where your happiness, confidence, and direction no longer rise or fall according to someone else's approval. You stop chasing because you have discovered something far more valuable than validation. You have discovered purpose. The strongest people are not those who make the most noise or demand the most attention. They are the ones who know that their time, energy, and focus are too valuable to be wasted on people who fail to appreciate them. And once you reclaim that inner control, the next level of power comes from mastering emotional detachment, because no one can truly control a person whose emotions are no longer dependent on external validation. The moment you stop chasing attention, people often respond in unexpected ways. Some become curious, others become frustrated. A few may even try harder to pull you back into old patterns. Why does this happen? Because many relationships are built on emotional predictability. The moment people know exactly how you will react, they gain a certain level of influence over you. They know which words will make you angry, which actions will make you chase them, and which moments of silence will fill you with anxiety. This is why emotional detachment is one of the greatest forms of personal power. The less your emotions are controlled by others, the less power they have over your life. Most people believe ignoring someone is enough to become powerful. It is not. You can ignore a person with your actions while remaining completely attached in your mind. You stop replying to their messages, but you constantly wonder what they are thinking. You avoid seeing them, yet you check their social media every day. You tell yourself that you have moved on, but one small action from them still changes your mood. This is not emotional freedom. It is emotional dependence hidden beneath physical distance. Real power begins when your mind is no longer occupied by the people you claim to be ignoring. Robert Greene repeatedly explains that the strongest individuals are those who master themselves before attempting to influence anyone else. Human nature is simple in one important way. People instinctively test emotional boundaries. They observe who becomes jealous, who seeks approval, who cannot handle rejection, and who reacts impulsively under pressure. Once they identify those emotional patterns, influencing that person becomes remarkably easy. They no longer need force because they already understand your emotional triggers. Every predictable reaction quietly gives them the control they were looking for. Think about someone who becomes anxious every time another person grows distant. Instead of remaining calm, they immediately send more messages, apologize for things they never did wrong, or desperately try to repair a relationship that only one side is fighting to maintain. They believe they are protecting the relationship, but psychologically, they are communicating something very different. They are revealing that their emotional stability depends on another person's attention. Once someone realizes they can control your emotions simply by withdrawing theirs, the balance of power has already shifted away from you. Now imagine someone whose confidence is rooted within themselves instead of within other people. They appreciate healthy relationships, but they never depend on them to define their worth. If someone respects them, they return that respect. If someone repeatedly disrespects them, they quietly step away without trying to convince the other person to change. They understand that self-respect is more valuable than forced acceptance. Their decisions are guided by principles rather than temporary emotions. Because of this, they become incredibly difficult to manipulate. You cannot threaten someone with rejection if they have already learned to value themselves without your approval. This is why emotional detachment makes ignoring people so powerful. It removes the emotional reward that manipulators often seek. Some people provoke arguments because they enjoy controlling your reactions. Others withdraw attention because they know you will chase them. Some criticize you simply to see whether they can shake your confidence. But when your emotional state remains steady, regardless of their behavior, those strategies lose their effectiveness. They quickly realize they can no longer predict or control your responses. There is another psychological truth that few people recognize. The person who needs the least validation often carries the greatest influence. Why? Because they cannot be easily persuaded through praise, fear, guilt, or rejection. Compliments do not inflate their ego, criticism does not destroy their confidence, and silence does not create panic. Their peace comes from within, not from the opinions of others. That quiet independence creates a presence people naturally respect because it cannot be bought, manipulated, or taken away. However, emotional detachment should never be confused with becoming cold or heartless. It does not mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop allowing other people's behavior to control your inner world. You still love, trust, and build meaningful relationships, but you no longer sacrifice your dignity. simply to avoid being alone. You no longer chase people who have repeatedly shown you where you stand. Instead, you invest your emotional energy where respect, honesty, and appreciation exist naturally. When you reach this level of emotional independence, something remarkable happens. You stop trying to win every argument because your peace becomes more valuable than being right. You stop explaining yourself to people determined to misunderstand you because your character speaks louder than endless words. Most importantly, you stop fearing rejection because your self-worth no longer depends on external approval. That is the moment ignoring people transforms from a strategy into a reflection of genuine inner strength. And once your emotions are no longer controlled by other people's actions, the next level of power comes from mastering silence. Because what you choose not to say often influences people far more than anything you could ever explain. Once you have stopped chasing attention and mastered your emotions, you unlock a form of power that very few people truly understand: the power of silence. Most people believe influence comes from saying the right words, winning every argument, or always having the perfect response. But human nature often works in the opposite way. The more you rush to explain yourself, defend every accusation, or react to every opinion, the more you reveal that your peace depends on being understood. Truly powerful people understand that silence is not weakness, it is controlled restraint. And when that silence comes from confidence instead of fear, it becomes one of the strongest reasons why ignoring people makes you powerful. Human beings are naturally uncomfortable with uncertainty. The mind constantly searches for answers, explanations, and closure. This is why silence has such a profound psychological effect. When you immediately respond to every criticism, every insult, or every misunderstanding, you remove all uncertainty. The conversation ends because every question has been answered. But when you remain calm and refuse to react impulsively, something remarkable happens. Instead of you thinking about them, they begin thinking about you. Their own mind starts searching for explanations that you never provided. Robert Greene often highlights one of the most important principles of influence. People are fascinated by what they cannot completely understand. Mystery captures attention because the human brain dislikes unfinished stories. When someone expects anger but receives composure instead, they become confused. When they expect you to defend yourself but you remain silent, they begin questioning their own assumptions. When they expect you to chase after them but you quietly continue living your life, uncertainty replaces certainty. And uncertainty has a way of occupying the mind far longer than endless conversations ever could. Think about what happens after a disagreement. Most people immediately feel the need to explain themselves. They send long messages trying to prove they were right. They repeat the same points in different ways, hoping the other person will finally understand. But the more they explain, the more obvious it becomes that they desperately need validation. Instead of appearing confident, they unintentionally communicate insecurity. They hand over their emotional power because they allow another person's opinion to determine how much energy they invest. Now imagine someone who behaves differently. They have spoken honestly. They have acted with integrity. Once they realize the other person has already decided not to understand them, they stop arguing. They refuse to waste their energy trying to change a mind that has already closed itself. They do not become rude or disrespectful. They simply recognize that not every conflict deserves another explanation. Their silence is not an attempt to manipulate anyone. It is a sign that they value their peace more than winning an argument. This is why silence makes ignoring people so powerful. It prevents others from controlling your emotional state. Every impulsive reaction reveals something about you. It exposes your fears, your insecurities, and the emotional buttons that can be pushed again in the future. Once people learn those patterns, influencing you becomes much easier. But when your responses become calm, measured, and intentional, they lose that advantage. They can no longer predict how you will react because you have stopped reacting emotionally and started responding wisely. There is another psychological reason silence commands respect. People instinctively pay closer attention to those who speak only when necessary. Someone who constantly explains themselves slowly loses authority because their words become ordinary. But someone who chooses their words carefully creates anticipation. Others begin listening more closely because they understand that when this person speaks, it carries meaning. Their silence is not empty. It is filled with confidence, discipline, and self-control. However, silence should never become a tool for manipulation. Many people use the silent treatment to punish others or force emotional reactions. That is not strength. It is simply another attempt to control someone else's feelings. Genuine power comes from silence that protects your dignity, not your ego. You are not refusing to speak because you want someone to suffer. You are choosing not to waste your energy where your words will no longer create understanding or value. This difference is what separates confidence from emotional games. The strongest individuals understand that every battle does not deserve their participation. They do not feel compelled to answer every accusation, defend themselves against every rumor, or respond to every disrespectful comment. They recognize that attention is valuable, and silence allows them to invest that attention where it truly matters. Instead of proving themselves to everyone, they allow time, consistency, and character to speak on their behalf. Ironically, this often creates more respect than any explanation ever could. When people realize they can no longer pull you into unnecessary conflict or provoke emotional reactions, they also realize they have lost the ability to control you. That is why silence is far more than the absence of words. It is the presence of inner strength. It reflects a person who values peace over drama, purpose over distraction, and self-respect over the need to be understood by everyone. And once silence becomes a reflection of your confidence, the next level of power comes from building a purpose so meaningful that ignoring distractions is no longer a strategy. It simply becomes the way you live. Once you understand the power of silence, the next lesson becomes impossible to ignore. Silence alone will not make you powerful if your life has no direction. You can avoid people, stay quiet, and distance yourself from every distraction, but if you are doing it without purpose, it becomes isolation instead of strength. The real reason ignoring people makes you powerful is because it allows you to protect the one thing that determines the quality of your future, your focus. Every moment you stop investing in meaningless drama becomes another moment invested in becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more valuable. That is where true power begins. Most people wake up every morning and immediately give their attention to everyone except themselves. Before they have worked on their goals, they are already checking notifications, replying to messages, reading opinions, and reacting to other people's lives. Without realizing it, they have allowed the outside world to dictate where their mind will go. By the time they finally think about their own dreams, most of their mental energy has already been spent. This is why so many people remain busy but never truly move forward. Their attention belongs to distractions, not to their purpose. Robert Greene repeatedly shows that history's most influential individuals shared one important characteristic. They protected their focus with extraordinary discipline. They understood that greatness is rarely destroyed by one major mistake. More often, it is weakened by thousands of small distractions that slowly steal time, energy, and clarity. Every unnecessary argument, every pointless competition, every attempt to prove yourself to people who do not care quietly pulls you away from the life you are trying to build. The strongest individuals recognize this early. Instead of fighting every battle, they become selective about where their attention goes. Imagine two people with the same talent and the same opportunities. The first spends hours every week arguing online, chasing people who ignore them, trying to correct every misunderstanding, and constantly worrying about what others think. The second invests those same hours learning a new skill, improving their health, strengthening their discipline, and working toward a meaningful goal. 1 year later, the difference between them is no longer small. It becomes impossible to ignore. The first person has gained temporary emotional satisfaction, but very little growth. The second has quietly transformed their life. The difference was never intelligence. It was focus. This is why ignoring people makes you powerful. It creates space for progress. Every distraction you refuse becomes an investment in your future. Every toxic conversation you walk away from gives you more energy for something that actually improves your life. Every opinion you choose not to argue with leaves you with more mental clarity to solve real problems. Power is not measured by how many people know your name. It is measured by how much control you have over your own direction. There is another psychological truth that explains why purpose naturally attracts respect. Human beings are instinctively drawn to people who are deeply committed to something meaningful. Someone who is constantly seeking attention appears uncertain because they need others to confirm their value. But someone whose attention is fully invested in building, creating, and improving carries a different kind of presence. They are not trying to impress anyone because they are too busy becoming someone impressive. Ironically, this is often the moment when people begin noticing them. Notice how the most accomplished individuals rarely waste time trying to win every argument. They understand that proving themselves to everyone is one of the fastest ways to delay their own success. Instead, they allow their work, their discipline, and their results to become their response. They know that achievements speak more convincingly than explanations ever will. This quiet confidence is not arrogance. It is simply the result of having a mission that matters more than public opinion. Purpose also protects you from emotional manipulation. When you know exactly where you are going, it becomes much harder for someone else's behavior to pull you off course. Criticism loses its ability to distract you because your goals remain unchanged. Rejection becomes easier to accept because your identity is no longer built around another person's approval. Even praise becomes less dangerous because you understand that temporary admiration should never replace long-term growth. Your purpose becomes the compass that keeps your attention moving in the right direction, regardless of what is happening around you. Many people ask why powerful individuals seem so difficult to distract. The answer is simple. They have already decided what deserves their energy. They understand that every yes to unnecessary drama is a no to something meaningful. They are not ignoring people because they believe they are better than everyone else. They are ignoring distractions because they refuse to let anyone interrupt the future they are working so hard to create. The moment your purpose becomes stronger than your need for attention, ignoring people stops feeling like a difficult decision. It becomes a natural habit because your eyes are fixed on something far greater than the opinions trying to pull you away. And once your purpose becomes your greatest priority, you discover that your absence often reveals your value more powerfully than your constant presence ever could. When your attention is no longer controlled by others, your emotions remain steady, your silence becomes intentional, and your purpose gives direction to your life, something begins to change in the way people see you. Ironically, they often notice your value only after they no longer have unlimited access to it. This is one of the deepest realities of human nature. People rarely appreciate what is constantly available. Familiarity can slowly turn appreciation into expectation and expectation into indifference. That is why one of the greatest reasons ignoring people makes you powerful is that it allows your absence, not your words, to reveal your true worth. Most people are afraid to step back because they believe they will be forgotten. They stay available even when they are being disrespected. They continue making the first call, sending the first message, fixing every misunderstanding, and carrying relationships that only they are trying to save. They tell themselves they are being loyal, but in many cases they are simply afraid of losing people. This fear keeps them trapped in situations where their time and energy are no longer valued. The more they give without boundaries, the more their presence becomes something others simply expect instead of appreciate. Robert Greene often reminds us that scarcity changes perception. Human beings place greater value on things they realize they can lose. This principle influences everything from business to relationships. Something that is always available gradually feels ordinary. Something that can disappear feels important. The same psychological principle applies to your attention. If people know you will always return no matter how they treat you, they stop recognizing the value of your presence, not because they are necessarily cruel, but because certainty often reduces appreciation. Imagine someone who is always available. No matter how many times they are ignored, they keep reaching out. No matter how often they are disrespected, they keep giving more chances. They immediately reply, immediately forgive, and immediately return after every disappointment. At first, this may seem like kindness, but over time, it quietly teaches others that access to this person requires no effort and no respect. Their loyalty becomes predictable, and what is predictable is often taken for granted. Without realizing it, they have trained people to believe that their presence is guaranteed. Now imagine someone who values both others and themselves. They are supportive, honest, and dependable, but they also understand that respect must exist in both directions. When they recognize a pattern of disrespect, manipulation, or one-sided effort, they do not create dramatic exits or demand appreciation. They simply stop forcing themselves into places where they are no longer valued. They redirect their attention toward their own growth, their own peace, and the people who genuinely appreciate their presence. Their absence is calm, dignified, and free from bitterness. This is where ignoring people becomes powerful. It creates space for reality to speak. Without arguments or emotional confrontations, people begin experiencing the difference your presence once made. The advice you gave, the consistency you offered, the stability you brought, and the respect you showed are no longer there. Sometimes only then do they recognize what they had overlooked. Not because you manipulated them into missing you, but because genuine value becomes easier to recognize when it is no longer constantly available. However, there is an important distinction that must never be ignored. Your absence only carries weight if your presence carried value. If your attention was built entirely on pleasing others while neglecting your own growth, stepping away will not automatically create respect. Lasting influence comes from becoming someone whose character, discipline, reliability, and integrity genuinely improve the lives of the people around you. When your presence consistently adds value, your absence naturally leaves a space that cannot be easily replaced. This is also why ignoring people should never become a game designed to make someone chase you. If your silence is simply another strategy to force a reaction, then your happiness still depends on their response. You are still emotionally connected to the outcome. Real power comes when you are willing to walk away without needing anyone to regret losing you. You step back because your peace matters more than proving your worth. Whether they recognize your value or not no longer determines your direction. There is another quiet strength hidden within absence. It teaches people accountability. When you constantly rescue others from the consequences of their own behavior, they rarely change. But when your attention is no longer available to reward disrespect, they are forced to confront the results of their choices. Some will grow from that realization. Others will continue repeating the same patterns. Either way, your responsibility is not to control their lesson. Your responsibility is to protect your own standards. The strongest people understand that their value is not measured by how desperately others hold on to them. It is